So a lot of the talk about invasive species in terms of removing them by hand is the question of what if they come back? Is it a permanent commitment? You know, are you going to have to do the exact same amount of work every single year? And even when they do come back, I'm happy to say that it doesn't seem like that is the case. For this video, I'm going to be using the invasive species bush honeysuckle to illustrate this point. And this is what it normally looks like this time of year. You know, nice, tall, big, bushy, lots of ripe red berries that the birds don't want to eat because they will make you sick. And, you know, this is what this part of the woods looked like. It was very annoying to traverse, and although it smelled great in the spring, it's not the kind of plants you want to have around. They tend to choke up the undergrowth and are in general bad for the environment. Now, I didn't quite get to that area last year, but I did get to this area. And you can see the dead bush honeysuckle right there. I left it to rot on this ground. That's very important because look what happened to the bush honeysuckle that resprouted. That stuff is quite diseased. This is fantastic because this is basically free herbicide. And you do have to be a little careful with it because if there's any native species nearby that is closely related, the disease could also affect that species. And, you know, just increasing the amount of diseased plant matter in an area has a chance to sort of spread, which is also potentially a good thing. Now, this particular area of bush honeysuckle is going to be fairly easy to deal with. All I have to do is continue to weaken it. A couple of periodic clippings will probably lead the disease to finish them off, and if the disease is only weakening them and doesn't finish them off, then some native plant will. Something like Virginia creeper, which is native here but invasive elsewhere, so that's pretty good at finishing things off. But I'm not going to leave all those dead clippings where they are like I did last year. I have a different idea for them. Some of it I'm going to take and just place right in here. Have fun! Now, I actually got this idea working on my garden, being very careful to make sure I sterilized my pruning shears to make sure they didn't spread diseases, and making sure I didn't retill any of the foliage into the ground because those rotting can spread some pretty nasty diseases, and I want these tomatoes to do quite well. But then I got the sly idea. What if I purposely don't do either of those two things for species that shouldn't be here? Now, I am probably going to want to knock this down so that it gets weakened and the disease takes and starts to further weaken this plant so that other plants can grow up and overtake the area. But, I mean, this is a pretty effective long-term solution to controlling invasive species. Once you have a plant that is clearly diseased, you can spread it around and use that almost like biowarfare against these invasive species. You do kind of have to be careful because you could potentially spread it to native species if they're closely related enough. But, hey, it's a finer way of doing things than just spraying the whole forest with herbicide. And herbicides are what are typically used to cull invasive species on a, large scale by companies and governments. So, in my mind, this is pretty good. This sort of biowarfare would naturally occur just from constantly cutting and weakening these plants. Spreading it around by hand and not cleaning pruning shears that you specifically use for invasive species just accelerates that process. Anyway, that's all for today. I do hope you learned something, and as always, I wish you the best. Till next time.